analysis of the McCarrick Report. Yesterday, as many of you know, the Vatican released the long-awaited report about former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick and his rise to power in the Church. This despite repeated allegations of sexual abuse of seminarians and minors. The report was supposed to answer the question, who knew what and when? Many of you out there may not have read the entire 450-page report, but I have, and I'm pretty sure our first guest has as well. Joshua McElwee is NCR's Vatican correspondent. He summarized the report for our readers yesterday and had another story at ncronline.org this morning. Welcome, Josh.
Great to be with you.
Our second guest is Juan Carlos Cruz, who is an abuse survivor originally from Chile. He is responsible for helping to move Pope Francis on the issue of sex abuse in the Church. Welcome, Juan Carlos.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. Before we get started, just a reminder, this event is interactive and we welcome questions from you as viewers. So if we ask you to put those in the comments and we'll try to get to as many of them as possible in the next half hour or so. I'll start with some questions for our guests and then we'll move to your questions in a bit. Josh, let's start with you. Could you give us a quick summary of what you think the highlights are in this report? What do we know now that we didn't know before?
Well, in our first report yesterday at NCR, we called the report explosive, and I think that's correct. It's a lengthy, detailed report on basically 80 to 90 years of church history, starting when Cardinal Theodore McCarrick was born in 1930. It highlights failures at every step of the way, institutional failures, systemic failures in how the church handled Cardinal McCarrick, how the church supported him and repeatedly promoted him despite warnings about his behavior. And I think it particularly highlights failures by two popes, Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI. For me, I think the apex of the report is about 50 pages highlighting the decision in the year 2000 of John Paul II to appoint McCarrick as the Archbishop of Washington, despite a warning in 1999 from New York's Cardinal John O'Connor that he had heard from impeccable sources that McCarrick was a figure who had either abused young men or slept in the same bed as them at retreat centers. And certainly that would raise a lot of red flags for anyone who might read that. That section of the report details that John Paul II basically took the appointment under his own wing and decided to go forward despite these warnings from Cardinal O'Connor, from the Vatican's ambassador in Washington, and from several other people. The report also highlights failings by Pope Benedict after John Paul II's death. Pope Benedict tried to impose some sort of sanction on Cardinal McCarrick, but did not do so personally or did not do so with his own authority, and so left the matter kind of up in the air for McCarrick to basically take advantage of the unclear situation and continue to travel the world and represent the church. So I think what we see in this report is traumatic, traumatizing, difficult, and revealing in terms of the failures that the church let happen, that two popes let happen. But we also have to keep in mind that Pope Francis has done a lot in the past 2 years in terms of reforms to put in place. But I think for abuse survivors, for victims, for historians, this is a very difficult moment.
Exactly, yeah, very hard reading. Juan Carlos, you tweeted yesterday that you were disgusted as you read the report. As someone who's experienced abuse by a priest and who then suffered the cover-up of that abuse, what are your thoughts today, and what are you seeing among other survivors in the wake of this report?
Yeah, well, the world of survivors is a world in its own, right? People have been so hurt in so many different ways. Some take longer to heal, some have committed suicide, some are still waiting for justice. I mean, it's a very hard and difficult world, and my heart really goes out to every single survivor, man, woman, past, present, who has suffered this, because it's not easy. For me, the disgust comes, it's one thing to know that these bishops or some bishops do these things, And it's another thing to see it in writing and to see all the time they spent writing about how wonderful this person was, or how, after even seeing some really bad situations, but yet it's like a mystery novel of cover up and deception and sadness for so many people. It also, to me, highlights this that the Vatican doesn't, the canon law doesn't have a solution for, but the pain and the abuse this causes to vulnerable adults as well, right? We always talk about minors, and it's absolutely horrible, but it also highlights the vulnerability of adult men and women, right? In this case, men. And another thing is how, for example, to me, Vigano, for example, Archbishop Vigano, tried to, who is sort of the auto-proclaimed new pope for North America, right, for the United States, but yet he becomes like, he's exposed. He's exposed for doing nothing, for being ordered to investigate, to talk to, and does nothing. And yet he's the first one to cast stones. And then the last thing amongst many is all these bishops that were siding with Vigano in the United States, the Bishop of Tyler, the Bishop of this, the Bishop of that. Where are they now? Are they going to say sorry? So those are the things that strike me, at first glance, if you will.
Josh, do you want to respond to any of that, or I can follow up with my own question if that's okay?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Well, just the report, as you said, places a lot of blame on John Paul II, and as Juan Carlos pointed out here as well, Archbishop Vigano, but it also includes this section about Pope Francis. So what is your take on his level of culpability?
Well, I think, as we said in our reporting, I think this calls into question basically three popes. So it's John Paul II, Benedict XVI, and Francis. In Francis's case, I think we have to acknowledge that he's been pope for 7 years, and he didn't really take action on McCarrick's case until the third or fourth year of his papacy, when there was an accusation that came forward in the Archdiocese of New York about abuse of a minor that was deemed credible by the review board in the Archdiocese of New York. Now, in that 3-year period before then, the report is quite clear that Archbishop Bergoglio, the future Pope Francis, had not had much contact with Cardinal McCarrick. Archbishop Bergoglio in Buenos Aires, Argentina, Cardinal McCarrick, of course, traveling the world, but they didn't have much contact together. There's actually a revealing point in the report where Bergoglio tells someone who's interviewing him that there had been some instance where McCarrick had come to Buenos Aires, and there was some event for high-level ecclesiastics, and Bergoglio said it wasn't for him, so he just didn't go, and he was too shy for that kind of an event. I think we do have to give Francis credit in terms of when the accusation came forward in 2017, 2018. It was acted upon quite swiftly. McCarrick was investigated, and he was asked to resign from the College of Cardinals, and then was ultimately removed from the priesthood.
Juan Carlos, that Pope Francis, who had previously been defending the hierarchy's response in Chile, he in fact even called your and others' allegations slander against the bishop who covered up. So after speaking with you and asking your forgiveness for not initially believing you, he has had a different reaction on this issue. So what is your reaction to the section of the report about Pope Francis?
Well, I concur with what Josh says. I mean, I have to start from the premise, Heidi, that being a survivor, and you too as well, and the people hearing us, so it's not, you don't have to be a survivor to feel this way, but there's so much pain and there's so much hurt, and especially, I mean, survivors, but also Catholic people who have not been involved in abuse, or it's just so horrific. And having been on the other side of when I read the report, I was thinking of our own case and thinking, no wonder nobody believed us. No wonder everybody was, covering up. No wonder Cardinal Errázuriz in Chile, me being Catholic and having remained Catholic and loving the church, and the good people that are in the church. It pains me tremendously when I told all my friends, I said, oh no, let's go to Cardinal Errázuriz. He'll help us. He's the Cardinal. He'll help us. And then after months of nothing happening, we realized the horrible truth that they were covering up, that they were, so having had the pre and post Pope Francis, and I never thought I would be friends with a Pope or talking to a Pope like I do, and I'm deeply honored about that. I do agree that he acted swiftly, but at the same time, I do think that there's the McCarrick report is not the end of everything. I think it's a new standard, though, for how we can do things in the church. I mean, I would love, for example, for the Scicluna report that talks about all the abuses in Chile and implicates, this horrific web of cover-up and all that. I wish there was a Scicluna report like the McCarrick report, So, hence for every where there is a situation like this, that this is the standard that we have now. So I commend Pope Francis. I hope he applies Vos Estis to Vigano and all those people who like to use survivors for props and pawns to further their agenda, because that makes me really angry because of all the suffering they cause. And when they were in a capacity where they could do something, they did nothing. But now that it serves their own agenda, now it's let's scream and shout. No.
Very interesting, Juan Carlos calling it the standard. I had the same reaction yesterday. I bet nearly every abuse survivor would love to see this level of investigation into their own cases as well. Josh, do you want to comment at all about Vos Estis and whether you think it might be something that could apply in any of the cases of people named here? We have an article this morning that kind of has a canon lawyer speculating about that.
Yeah, our national correspondent Chris White reported that story about Vos Estis is the law that Pope Francis passed about a year and a half ago for how bishops could be investigated if they haven't reported abuse or if they tried to cover it up. It's unclear to me a little bit how it might work in this case, in some of the cases, because this involves Vatican officials and diplomats, and I think Vos Estis was really written for diocesan bishops, so bishops in charge of dioceses. But there's a host of names throughout this report. I mean, it's 450 pages. There are dozens of Catholic bishops in the US who are mentioned at some point. I don't know that there's going to be a desire on the part of the Holy See or the Vatican to kind of get vindictive, to go after certain figures. I think there's a feeling that the report itself has a lot of importance in terms of what it says and what it reveals. My personal question is a lot more at the systemic level in terms of how do these processes get changed? The Vatican talks about how much reform the Pope has brought in terms of abuse proceedings, and that's very true. Getting rid of the pontifical secret, which makes an abuse victim able to talk about their case even when it's ongoing, which is a huge thing. If in that time when the McCarrick case was going forward, if an abuse victim could have talked about their case, we could imagine that perhaps there would have been media coverage, or perhaps there would have been more knowledge of what was going on. But my question is also at the systemic level in terms of the process of the appointment of bishops. Who is evaluating who will be a bishop? How many lay people are involved? If someone is being vetted, do people know? Can they come forward and say, I've heard something about this man, he shouldn't be a bishop? All of this is still largely taking place behind in a system that isn't very open. And so I have a lot of questions about that kind of thing, the processes of the Vatican that are continuing to this day that are reflected in the report.
Yeah, and given that you do are friends with the Pope now, Juan Carlos, I was wondering if I could just follow up and say, and ask you, given what you know about Francis's character, how do you think it must be for him to be reading this report or to be seeing the reaction worldwide to it? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, and before I tell you that, I just want to agree completely with what Josh said. But there's one thing that I think is important. Um, Going back and judging these people, I'm not a canon lawyer, so I don't really know how it works. And I'm sure the viewers know much more than I do, because but it's not about it being vindictive. It's about justice, right? Um, like I said, and I always say this wherever I go. I go crazy when I've been in panels with bishops, not in the United States, in Chile, in Mexico, in Europe. And they said, well, in the 90s and the 80s, we didn't have these protocols that, helped us, look, raping a child, molesting a child has been wrong before Christ, after Christ, in the Middle Ages, now, and it will always be wrong. So if you are a bishop and you don't realize, and you need a protocol to realize that someone's being abused, you should leave. You're not a good bishop. You should not be a bishop. So having met Pope Francis and having been close to him, to your question, Heidi, I have seen him uh, destroyed about this. I've seen the pain. I've talked to him about, because one thing, I've never wanted this to be about me or my case. Every time I go in and I talk to him since day one, it's been about how can we help survivors all over the world. I bring him letters, I bring him, whatever I can do to help others. So I have seen, after having seen how other popes reacted, as Josh explained very well, and you guys have explained it well, but what Pope Francis has done after the summit that he did, the Pontifical Secret, Vos Estis, all these things, those are good things for survivors. We can do more. Absolutely, we can do more. And I blame a lot of the bishops that go and say, yes, Pope Francis, of course we're going to do this. Go back to their diocese, even the curia, because they're not exempt, I feel, Josh, also. If they're in the curia, they're nuncios, they're whatever. They're bishops, they're part of this. And they go to Pope Francis, say, absolutely, Pope Francis. They go back and they they remain doing the same things. So that's what frustrates me. And I think it frustrates Pope Francis too, I think.
So just a reminder that we will be taking questions from those of you who are viewing this with us live. And I'm going to turn to some of those questions now. One of the questions, and either of you could take this, is how widespread is this? So is the report reflective of how other dioceses besides the ones named in the report, how their chanceries operate? Is there such a lack of communication, the nepotism, the careerism? And if so, does the remedy really start at the local level? Josh, you want to take that one? Start?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, Juan Carlos mentioned before the report that Archbishop Scicluna did on the church in Chile, which was really a groundbreaking report that went very deep into essentially corruption and abuse. And I wonder if a similar report were done in the US, if a similar report were done in Canada or in wherever, if it might reveal similar things. Because I think, as we at NCR have editorialized about for a while, we're dealing with cultural issues, with issues of a culture of promotion within within the clergy, of a desire to keep things in house, to not mar the name of the church, and to not go to authorities when you should go to authorities. And I think Pope Francis has really made huge strides in this area in terms of mandating that all clergy have to report abuse, that not reporting abuse is a crime in the church. He hasn't quite made it mandatory to report to local authorities. I think that's something that abuse survivors are asking him to do. Um, but I think we're really dealing with cultural issues in terms of being Catholic and the deference we give to bishops and to authorities, And how do we manage that while at the same time protecting people who are vulnerable and making sure that when something goes wrong, someone knows?
Mhm. I feel, Heidi, as well, that you know, um, I get really frustrated because McCarrick is not the only McCarrick out there. Um, and you can talk to any survivor, and I've dealt with one, and many others around the world have dealt, if not everyone. And it's incredibly frustrating, and it's incredibly sad. And independent of being a survivor, just being a Catholic, it just breaks my heart, right? That where you go for solace, where you go for peace, where you go to be a better human being, it turns into this disgusting. And so, for me, it's important that these laws are applied, that these bishops realize that they have to do something. There's a whole new wave of other bishops that are hopefully going to change the world. But the importance of lay people in the church, the importance of women in the church, that is really key to make it more inclusive and to address this issue in a more sophisticated way, if you will. That to me is really important. And these people that are the clericalism, the corruption. If you read when you read the McCarrick report, the corruption, the money, the finance, the these bishops that ought to dispensate themselves from their rules, right? It's incredible. That's the clericalism, the elitism that there's. I've heard stories of priests during the pandemic that are going crazy because they don't know what to do because they can't celebrate the sacraments. So that's such a misunderstanding of what a priest is. I mean, to me, we could speak hours about this, but. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned women and money. So for people who haven't read the report yet, I know I was very struck by the story towards the beginning about the woman anonymously referred to as Mother One, who had a gut feeling about her sons and about the way McCarrick was grooming them in terms of having them call him uncle and him taking them on trips. So at least some women, I think, had some concerns very early on. The issue of the money is one that's been raised by two of our people writing in with questions. The report doesn't deal as much with some of the financial questions around McCarrick, who was a very successful fundraiser for the church. And people are wondering, is there any chance that the Vatican might follow the money that McCarrick controlled and do any sort of follow-up report or ramifications about that? Josh, do you want to speculate?
Well, I think even if you just read the report as it is, it's very clear that McCarrick was a substantial fundraiser for the global Catholic Church. I mean, through associations with organizations like Catholic Relief Services, Aid to the Church in Need, and dozens of others, it's clear that he was someone who could go to donors or go to people and ask for money. Now, the report doesn't quite draw a line between that and how he was treated either by John Paul or Benedict. It certainly doesn't draw a line in terms of why he was appointed to Washington. I think we have a lot of questions about what might have been behind that beyond John Paul's favorability towards McCarrick. I think there are a lot of questions to answer also from the groups that McCarrick helped, groups like Catholic Relief Services, groups like the Bishops' Conference. And I don't know how we're going to get at that or what the mechanism will be to kind of find that information out.
Intrepid reporters from the National Catholic Reporter will get right on that. I would also be interested in getting an opinion from both of you about whether you think this report is credible. So some people in the church, maybe those who are trying to protect those who don't come off looking so well in it, John Paul II or Vigano or others, are saying this is a whitewash. Do you find the report credible, Juan Carlos?
In my experience and living what I have lived, I find it incredibly credible, and I think it's even worse than what we're reading. You know, I don't understand how bishops who have their hands into this mess and are just gonna go keep walking through life like nothing happened. I I do believe that this is a good report. This, like I said at the beginning, it should be the standard for everybody who's seeking justice. This is not for some privileged ones. It's you know, and I heard too. Someone told me, well, maybe the Shikluna report shouldn't be, you know, done like the McCarrick report because the Latin American church is not as mature as the U.S. church. Bull, you know. They should. Nobody's mature enough. This is about crimes. This is about and there are crimes in Latin America, in Africa, in Europe, and in the United States. And we need to be transparent and hold people who commit those crimes accountable. And a report like the McCarrick report is a great way to start holding people accountable. And there's many McCarricks right now that are trying maybe to distance themselves. Oh no, I didn't say this because, you know, they should be held accountable.
Josh, what do you think about the credibility of the report?
Well, it's hard to say specifically because I've never seen something quite like it. I think we're going to look back and think that this was quite historic. I mean, the Vatican really opened up, or at least they seem to have opened up their archives. It's a 450-page report dotted with thousands of footnotes relating to, I would guess, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of documents that they've reviewed, that the Secretary of State says it has reviewed. They did 90 witness interviews. They say those range from 1 hour to 30 hours in length. And so I think in my first reading, I think they're showing us a lot. I can't imagine, perhaps there are things they aren't showing us, but the length and the breadth of the report is so enormous. I think it's very hefty, and although there maybe are things that they aren't showing us, it's hard to say what those would be, and it's hard to say that that would impugn the credibility of the entire report.
We have quite a few questions. We might go a minute or two over our half-hour limit here, but a couple of factual questions. Someone's asking about the identity of the New Jersey bishops who apparently did not give the complete or accurate information when they were asked. I know our initial report, which you based, Josh, on the summary, did not include their names, and we went back into our main story and added their names because they were in the body of the report. Did you want to say anything about those bishops, Josh?
Yeah, so this relates to the period in which John Paul II was considering to appoint McCarrick as Archbishop of Washington. And after receiving the letter from John O'Connor warning about making that appointment, the Vatican's ambassador in the U.S. wrote to 4 New Jersey bishops. It's not clear why he chose those 4. It might have been just the bishops he had known. And those were James McHugh, Vincent Breen, Edward Hughes, and John M. Smith. What the Vatican says about that is that 3 of the 4 of those people provided, quote, inaccurate and incomplete information, end quote, about McCarrick's conduct with young adults. In the full report, it's quite clear that the Vatican ambassador thought Edward Hughes had been the most forthright, although later it becomes clear that even he may have withheld a little bit of information. But these 4 bishops, obviously, at the time would have been in a very difficult position because McCarrick was the Archbishop of Newark. They were all diocesan bishops basically in McCarrick's province, and it would have been a very strange thing for them to receive this letter asking, what do you think of your boss? And by the way, have you heard any allegations about him? I think that points also to some of the continuing systemic questions.
Juan Carlos, do you have any additional comments about the bishops investigating bishops problem that we have?
Yeah, it's hard to auto police yourself, right? And how do you do that? And Josh says it very well. Like, what do you think of your boss when when we're talking here about asymmetry of power, just like, like we see in abuse, right? And the what we were talking earlier, and it's not just minor, it's vulnerable adults, and it's you know this asymmetry of power. So it's very hard to auto police themselves. That's why I always call for these boards of with women, with men that understand what they're talking about, right? I think sort of a third party that independent that could investigate these things if we're going to take it seriously. It pains me tremendously to think that I received justice because the Garadima case was so popular or so horrible. The McCarrick report, and there's thousands of other people that don't get this privilege, if you will, and to me that's painful.
So a number of our questions, and this will be my last question to each of you, have to do with where do we go from here? So a number of people are asking, will McCarrick go to jail? Will Vigano be disciplined? This question struck me. Someone is asking, how can we better communicate our support to survivors in our liturgical celebrations and our pastoral work? So just, Jen, in whatever way you want to answer it, I'll give you each a chance to say, where do you think we can go from here? Josh, would you like to go first?
Well, I think I would start with the last thing about supporting survivors. We're very lucky to have Juan Carlos with us today. Through my work at NCR, I think I would say we at NCR feel a special obligation to report on clergy abuse, given our publication's role as the first national outlet to report on that in 1985 in the United States. And in my career at NCR, I've had the privilege of working with several abuse survivors to report on difficult cases or to help try to bring light to abuse and difficult issues and to bring justice in whatever way a journalist can. And I think it's very difficult work, but for us, it's a small taste of what people have gone through, the horror of how people have been abused. And I think if nothing else, the McCarrick report can tell us how important it is to know survivors, to talk to them, and to help in whatever way you can, to bring forward their story or to help in whatever way is helpful to them.
For me,
go ahead. Where should we go from here?
For me, Heidi, it's not about revenge, but it's about justice, right? I feel we have to hold these people and everybody else that's not in the McCarrick report that has abused, but in this case, those who are named and have committed these crimes, we have to hold them accountable. For me, that's critical for justice and not for revenge, because we always say this. It's sort of a cliche when you take a malignant tumor out of someone and then you don't do anything else when that person might need chemo, might need to recover completely, right? So here it's just like taking one little tumor and cancer might be festering somewhere else, right? And so to me, that's really important. And second, all those people that, throw darts at a pope that is actually doing something, it might not be what we want and it might not be everything we need done. I want them to see what they say now. They follow this auto-proclaimed North American U.S. Pope Vigano, and he's hiding somewhere, and they're hiding in their diocese now. And the other thing is just be sensitive and be aware and lend a hand to every single survivor. It hurts me tremendously to think that there are survivors who dare to tell their stories, as hard as it might be. Men, women that have told it or are telling it now. And there's all these other silent survivors, many more, that walk around this world where their lives probably ruined and painfully living every day. And we need to be sensitive to that, seek them out, lend a hand, be there, hold people accountable. There's so many groups. Some survivors don't agree with each other, fine, because I take it because you know, there's so much pain, and everybody has their thinking on how this should be solved. I do, and I know others don't agree with me, but I try to do my best to help in any way. And as Catholics or people of goodwill, we need to make sure that those who speak and those who are walking with this silent misery inside, they deserve to live a happy life as well, no matter what age they are, no matter at what age they tell the story. And a way of solving that is to hold those who have committed those crimes on them to be held accountable.
Well, thank you, Juan Carlos. On that note of compassion and justice, I think would be a good place for us to end our analysis event today. I want to thank both of you, Juan Carlos Cruz and Joshua McElwee, for being our guests today. And a special thank you to our behind the scenes folks, Stephanie Yeagle and Brittany Wilmus, who helped produce this event. Please go to ncronline.org to find all of our coverage of the McCarrick Report, and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram for more coverage in the future. Thank you so much for joining us.